can't make up my mind. Do I want coffee? I put on a little bit of coffee, but couldn't really decide. Ooh. Jesus. Hey, what's going on over there in YouTube? What the hell? Oh, and they're gone. All right. I don't know what we're gonna do today. I don't know how much we'll manage to do. I was honestly like a borderline if I was gonna do this stream, because I'm a little fucked, but we'll see. Hopefully we figure something out. But what that is, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. We need to continue working on the window. The window works. The window works now. So we need to just continue working on it. And we need to create like prefabs, which is a little unfortunate. So do you put that in system or... I think we'll put that in system, just as a file. We'll call that like object prefab db. We'll make it a public static class. And in it, we will say public static class GUI, public static class Windows, public static class... No, it's not a class. These are just containers. In which case they like technically don't even need to be classes. Could just be namespaces, kind of. I don't know if it matters. Alright. Oh, the music is a bit loud, I think. I'll have to turn that down. Maybe it's not that loud. It's actually kind of low. But whatever. Oh. And then here we will simply say entity entity equals new entity return entity. And there we have our test window. Should they be internal? Yes, they could be internal. Doesn't really matter. Here. I mean, it's in system, so it shouldn't need to use hexes.system. But there's a window in this case. Hexes system objects components. We also want system.graphics. This, I'm not so sure what we should do about. Entity list insert. I feel like this should just exist here. Like entity list.insert. I just feel like that's something that should happen in initialize. But we have an entity list that's just entities. But we have an entity master dictionary. And here that gets added there. So what am I doing with the entity list? Yeah, I think this is a good solution. Because the idea here is that we have we just have a list of entities here. And it contains a key to the master entity dict. And it contains a key for the component. Because if I don't do that, it becomes really difficult to actually fetch the correct component as that component type. Because the clickable entity list, it really means that the entity has a component that is clickable. But that also kind of means that it might have two components that are clickable. Which is generally a bad idea, and it shouldn't really be that way, but it might be that way as well. And the question is, like, how should I handle buttons? Because I feel like buttons should not be able to exist without a window. Like there shouldn't ever be just a button. And the reason for that is because, first of all, in the UI, it just shouldn't be that way. Like, it shouldn't look that way, really, ever. But on top of that, it's it's a sorting problem, right? Because if all the buttons are all like separate and capable of checking themselves and storing themselves inside of the entity or the clickable entity list, then it becomes extremely complicated and difficult to sort them in a way where, like, okay, this window is actually above this window, but that window contains all of these buttons. So all of this window's buttons are actually like above, and then that way you can't just go through the list and just do it that way. So as long as buttons exist as a sub-function of a window, like almost exclusively, then buttons don't need to be counted as a clickable entity. And instead, they count as a sub-function of a window, right? Like, it's like a recursive click. So you click a window, and then the window checks if it has any buttons on it. So there's no button, there's only a window window function, which is a button. Because I think that anything in the UI that is ever clickable should be part of a window, really. Even if that window is invisible. It's just gonna make everything so much easier, I think. That way we can just have it in a normal list. And whatever is clicked or interacted with last, whatever is created last, is just inserted at 0. And that's it. But yeah, because I don't know if there's a better list variant. I think a list is fine. Like it doesn't need to be optimized or whatever. Like it doesn't need to be a queue, because that would be stupid. It doesn't need to be a sorted list. I don't even know what it would be otherwise. Like a dictionary wouldn't make sense. A hash list doesn't make sense, or hash set doesn't make sense. So I think just the list is just a normal list with an int tuple is fine. Though I'm not a huge fan of tuples, but it's mainly just because I don't like them, because they're called item 1 and item 2. For some reason I prefer if it's just called X and Y, even though that's like almost even more confusing. But the tuple is what we're gonna do, I think. Let's see, I only lightly boiled the coffee today. Let's see if it's awful. Actually not bad. So then the question is, should the window have something called add button? The window already has a button list here, but I think it doesn't really matter in the window. Like, a list is fine. It doesn't need to be a dictionary. The buttons don't have any, like, the ID of the button within the window, I think doesn't matter. Does it? It could. It kind of could. But I don't think it really does. The button has a button function. When triggered, it functions it triggers the trigger. Check window collision. Here it's just gonna return true. And that's what we don't want to do here. What we want to do is we want to say we don't want to actually, no, maybe we do want to. Maybe we do want to do that. Let's also add a boolean here called public bool re like we have movable, but what would you call it for like being resorted? Should I just call it like resortable? Sortable? Because I feel like some windows should just not be sortable, and they should just remain within their position. And maybe even like be behind the sortable windows. You know? Though, I have to say, I wonder if we should be checking, like, count -1 or whatever is at the front. Because I feel like inserting at 0 in a list is the worst way you can use the list. Whereas if you insert at the end, or just add, that's a costless function. But unless you have like 40 windows, it doesn't matter. And odds are there won't be a lot of windows. And on top of that, I do think that the windows should be separate. Like a window that can be moved and reorganized should be in a separate list. Because it's either that or you like sort them inside of a list, and I think that's just unnecessary. Because if there is a window you can open and move around, that window should always take priority over a window that is unmovable and like more fixed and part of the UI. Like, you know, like a resource counter at the top or something like that. If you move a window over that, it should block it. And clicking that, even if you click like the half of a button that you see behind, it should never move that above the draggable window ever. So like clickable entity list. Let's call this fixed clickable entity list. And the window let's call it fixed. Oh, fuck. It's fixed. Okay, there we go. Let's change movable to is movable then. There. And I want the window to have like a component system. Like I want the buttons and the window to use a component system internally as well, so that they can have like a public window behavior script, window behavior script, you know, something like that. And then I want to say here in the GUI button function db button function, then here we'll say window behavior. Now let's just call it window behavior. Using what happened? It's access.system.gui. Then we have a window behavior, if we spell it correct. And what I want to do is I want to run specialized code in there for everything. So we want window collision, but these should all be virtual. And this should do my internet fucked up. What's happening? I'm not dropping frames, but YouTube is shitting the bed. Oh, music. This needs a constructor, public class, public window behavior. Then this should take, this should be an entity, base entity. Entity base entity. This dot base entity equals base entity. Right? And then here the question is, do we do it like this? Because we can initialize this with a window behavior equals null. And then we'll say if window behavior equals null, then we'll say window behavior script, which we'll change the name to just window behavior. Then this dot window behavior equals holy shit. Window behavior equals new window behavior, and then it takes base entity I think this is a little bit pointless complexity, but then we say check window collision. Here we're gonna say window behavior dot check window collision position. We'll pass that on. And then we return that. And then here we don't do anything. And then in window behavior, we do this. And this is a virtual bool. Right? So this is the standard collision for a window. If it has no specific window behavior, it just does a basic point to AABB check, and that's it. But then it can also have an override. And if so, we'll call the check window collision on the override. And then the window might have its own specialized collision. And then we'll check that, right? So a window might use a stencil for collision checks, for example. Because it might have curves or something. Instead of just being purely square. Don't know if I need that, but it could do that. We'll see. And then I'm just thinking, what about buttons? I don't really think that... I don't think the button collision needs to have an override. It's just that if we find the window, then we need to check See, here, I don't think that the bool is sufficient. It depends on how I want to do this. Because I guess you could do a function in main controller instead. Because here you have check left click and click collision check. Here we're checking through this stuff. If we find a component that is eye-clickable, then we click it, and that's gonna be a window because we're clicking inside of the window component here, and then we're running a C click collision check, which in the window is this. No, it's not. Hold on. Click collision check. It's this. So this, the check window collision is actually incorrect. We want to do this. Because here, as you can see, I am doing a trigger. And that's incorrect. We can't do a trigger here. It needs to just return true or false. Otherwise, the return has to be much more advanced, I think. Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it doesn't. What if... What if the standard window behavior is as such? So here we're doing point in AABB. Instead we do the window behavior dot check window collision, and if that is successful, then we do for... Oh man, why is it fucked? I really dislike this. This is a bug. It's just super annoying. Fine, I'll type the fucking for loop. There, because I want completion suggestions. Like, they are good. They are a net positive, but it's so annoying that it fucks up the for loop. And once I had it actually suggest the rest of the for loop. So like, why is it overwriting? Oh, hold on. You have to press tab twice now. Okay. So that's what they've changed. What? Tab twice to insert the snippet. It's so weird. Alright. Alright, well, problem solved. Weird, but problem solved. So here... we're gonna say bool. Check equals... button list I dot function dot hasn't been implemented. We only have a trigger here, so let's add a public virtual bool I don't really know what to call it. Quick collision check. Back to I position. No. Public button function. And this is the virtual. So then we're just gonna run it against return pointing AABB point POS base entity dot rect dot transform dot rect. Yeah. If let's say bool check equals, and then if check is true, then we will say trigger and then return check. And then here we just say return check. And then here we're gonna say using system.diagnostics debug.write-line button trigger executed correctly. Right? And what we're going to do then is in the window behavior, we're also going to have a trigger. And it's going to say, we're going to do the same. It's actually going to be basically the same script. I wonder if I should just copy like the whole thing. Why am I bothering with this, by the way? Wouldn't it be easier to just do globals, static, public, static, I mean, it can be an internal, static, class, internal static, main controller, main equals main controller dot access. Isn't this easier? That way we don't have to keep assigning this, because I feel like I'm retarded when it comes to this whole thing. I don't know. Like I keep switching how I do this all the time. And it's just ridiculous. So that's correct. Window collision. Check, click collision check. right? Using system.diagnostics. Okay, let's see. So the trigger here, this should be a little more. So if check, right? If check, we need to say window check. Then here we're gonna say bool button check equals false for I think I didn't I just make this? This should also have a connection, not just to the base entity, but to the actual window. Window. Base window. That's using hexes.system .objects.components. I think I might have separated them too much. I don't really have a good practice for all these, where to put all of these, but we'll see. I feel like maybe like most things should just be in system and just be there, like not sorted too much, because actually the sorting is what makes it annoying. Like every single component just goes in system, I think. And in fact, it's almost like should the sub-components be in components? You know? Like anything that inherits from components could just be in the components file. Is that disgusting? I feel like that makes some sense. To like avoid just script sprawl. The script sprawl is kind of annoying too. But I guess it really depends on the size of your component scripts. Because then you might end up with a CS file that's like 40,000 lines long, and that's not great either. I don't really know. Let's see what we can, what answers we can get in regarding to this. Let's see if we can get some answers. I think this could give like real answers because there's a lot of stuff about like industry standards in terms of things like this. Three levels deep maximum. I think that's fair. Like this sucks. I don't like this at all. Like system.objects.components, like that's... Oh, that's not good. Like what even is an object? Like an object, it doesn't really even exist. Like what is in there? Component entity. That's just a system thing. Right. Same like a component, that's just system. But I don't have, like... We also don't have to match it. Right? Like here, we can have components. Here. This is sprite renderer, which is in objects components. We can move this out to system. I think that's fair. And like just delete the objects one, because that one's kind of dumb. And then internet got fucking weird. And then in here, this doesn't need to be in components like that. Like, it can be in the components folder, but it doesn't need to be in a components namespace. That's unnecessary. And this graphics, a sprite. Same thing here. I think this shouldn't be called graphics. Well, man, maybe. System.graphics. No, let's just put it in its own folder. Let's see. Yeah, I know I can't move it there. That's why it's supposed to just cancel it. We put this in Hexes. And then we have hexes.graphics, which right now just contains sprite. Is GUI is a button and a window graphics or system? Or should this be in its own thing, like UI? Or is UI a system? I think we might make GUI be its own namespace entry. Camera, definitely system. Component. Because I don't, like, component being here is good. But I definitely don't want, like, every component to be in this list. That it needs to be contained there. And then we do that with the namespace. I think that's good. Object prefab DB. I think this should just be called a prefab database, and that's it. Then here we have the GUI. And this, let's try using our new globals.main. Like that. What? There's no argument given that corresponds to the required parameter base entity of button function dot button function entity. Use primary constructor. What? Am I dumb? What's happening? You need to set this up for this to be able to be a thing. Oh, okay. Since your base class only has a parameterized constructor, you must explicitly chain to it with a base. Oh, okay. Oh, there we go. There, yeah, because I don't want it to have a parameterless one. Alright. Okay. Alright. That makes sense. That makes sense. So then this .base entity gets ran here. But this should also take a button, base button, I think. Yes. I don't know if it needs that, but we can give it that. That way it functions just like the window. That's a prefab database. This is behavior database, maybe. Public static class GUI. Hello, ho ho. Not doing a whole lot of hexes, but yeah. I'm honestly like sorting things here, almost. I was fixing the namespaces, they were getting weird. Did I finish the pirate game? No. I killed the first boss. I don't know how much of the game is in. But I started using the map, so it became a little faster. The game doesn't work without the map, unfortunately. Basically, just setting up click detection for buttons here. But I'm trying to do it in a way where it is you can plug in behavior in both the window and the button, so that they can have alternate alternate function without me having to have infinite classes that inherit from window. It's kind of the same thing at the end of the day, but I feel like it's more in the spirit of the ECS, or the Entity Component System, where the buttons function with component behavior rather than being a unique button. Binding UI windows is hard mode, I think, often even more difficult than mechanics or managing the data. We'll see. We can already move the window around, so I think it's like half defeated. But yeah, we'll see. Where are we right now? Window behavior. Yeah, here. Okay. So now we go into the base window. This is window behavior. So then we go into base window dot button list dot count, and we iterate through the buttons in the window. I am treating buttons as something that doesn't exist on its own. A button cannot exist without a window. So a button is a subfunction of a window rather than a separate entity on its own, because it makes it easier to like handle them in terms of sorting and stuff. If you have windows that can be in different like layers on top of each other, and you can move them around. If you click another window, it brings it to the forefront. That way it's the window itself, when you click on it, that handles detection on the buttons. And you don't have to track every single button separately. Okay. So here's how it works. When we click, the game will then check the UI first. It will iterate through all of the windows to see if we can click on the window. And if it finds a window, it will then iterate through that window's buttons. And if it finds a button, it will trigger that button. And if it doesn't find a button, it will trigger the window. And then the window will have its own internal function for what happens when you click the window. It might be nothing, but it might also be initiating a drag or something like that, right? And so here we're running a button check. So button check equals a base window dot button list I dot check collision position. And if button check is true, then we are going to run this button. No. If it returns true, if button check, then we return true. If nothing here returns true, then we trigger the window, and then we return window check. Otherwise, we return window check. And in this case, window check is true. I'm just putting window check there because it's gonna be true. anyway. And then down here is return window check. Actually, this return isn't needed. We can just do this there. So then window check, if window check is true, then we go through all of this, then we trigger, and then we return. And if any of these are true, if the button is true, it will trigger the button. And if the button is triggered, it will return so that it doesn't trigger the window. And if no button is found, it then triggers the window and then returns true. And if it returns true, that cancels the click. Here. So here we have a click collision check, which returns a boolean, and check left click. This is gonna say, this is a for loop, right? If component is iClickable, this is kind of not true. Here we'll say bool is clicked equals false. Hold on. Yeah. So, clickable entity list. Here we're gonna then say is clicked equals, and then if is clicked, we then return true, right? And then here, this returns if LMB equals true, then we cancel this. Okay. We finally got through that. So basically, we run handle mouse input, we get state. If left mouse button is true, well, we do check left click, right? And if object is not dragged, we then check for we then check for this. Because if an object is dragged, then it needs to work slightly differently. Then we just need to check if we have released the dragged object. And if there is no object that is dragged, then we go in here and we check if button is pressed and the previous state was released, then that's a click. And then we go through everything in the clickable entity list, and we get the component that is clickable. Then we check if it is iClickable, then we cast that to C using the iClickable thing. And then we do the click collision check, which is from the iClickable interface. And if this then returns true, that means that we have either triggered a window or a button. And if that is true, then we do isClicked, return true, and then that cancels the rest of the click. And then whatever the button does is exclusively handled in the button. Whatever the window does is exclusively handled in the window. So if the window is draggable, we don't care here. All we do is, if we find anything at all that is clickable, we then cancel the click and do whatever the clicked object is programmed to do. And if it is set to be draggable, it will simply assign itself to the dragged object. And then on the next update, we can do this, right? And we just check, is the button still pressed? Then we drag. Then we translate to the new mouse position. And that's it. Oh. Yes. And then I would say, technically, a window doesn't really need to have an isMovable or isFixed boolean, because it is all handled inside of its function. But it could also be okay for it to be here, because this is like universal variables that can then be... I mean, I don't know if it matters. Because if it's not movable, then that's just handled through its function, right? But maybe not. Maybe it should be in the window, because like what would make it not movable? It's either that it's set to not be movable by default, because it's just a button that, or a window that should never move, like a fixed UI thing. And in that case, then the is movable doesn't really matter, does it? Other than for like sorting purposes, I suppose. And the only case I could see is if I add like a pin button or something that would then pin the window, because then the window would need to be able to be either movable or not movable. So I think having that in the window is fine. We'll just do that for now, but I'll be right back. Ooh. What is happening? Dude. Right, it's here in the window behavior. So the window itself, when it says click check, click collision check. It's going to go to window behavior, which is a virtual bool. So in the window, it should just say return window behavior dot click collision check position. That should be all. Right, and then in there we check the buttons. I guess. I guess something like that. What is happening? Might have to do this. Might have to switch over to Winamp. If it's gonna be fucky. I don't know what I like. We play. I just like doing some future music when working on this. But I don't know what I have. Let's just take some shit, I suppose. Holy shit, that's ancient. Does that still exist? There's no way. No, I shouldn't. I shouldn't do that. Uh, I guess near could work. Unreal Tournament. Yeah, let's go with something like this. I feel like I should just run this content.load in the database. Character window should be equals database dot GUI dot windows dot test window. And here, this is taking a sprite. Base window was null. Okay, doesn't quite work. That's because this doesn't have a trigger here. So here, the base behavior is just gonna be something like if base window dot is movable, then globals dot main dot object dragged equals base window base entity. Is that enough? Yeah. Okay. So now we have the window there. Then what if we go to the system. I wonder, should we have a folder called databases? And we put that in Hexes. And then we have prefab database there. And we have hexes.databases. Then we can rename this to prefabs instead of prefab databases. Prefabs. Actually, what if we put this in hexes.system? That way, we only have to type databases.prefabs and we access it. Because everything should have hexes.system. It doesn't, but it should. I think that might be good. And then we go here. But now in main controller, character window, databases.prefabs. And very soon we're gonna run into the issue of where do we load things and how. That's gonna be ass. But for now, let's just not worry about that, and we'll say window frame sprite. And that's gonna need its own full system, right? Where it's gonna have to we're gonna have to make an internal reference system, I think. Basically, like, let's say I load a texture, right? Because I want to create a sprite out of that texture. The texture then needs to be loaded, and it needs to be put into a... maybe a dictionary, I'm not sure. Either way, it needs to be put into a collection. And maybe the texture itself should be the key. I'm not sure if that's stupid, but it just uses the reference as the key. Let's say the texture is the key. It then contains a hash set as the value, and the hash set contains object IDs. And the second no more objects use the texture, it should be unloaded. Maybe. I think you might have two different systems. You can have a dynamic system like that for loading objects on the fly, and you can also have a more static system that just handles textures that should be alive. Just always. Like UI, for example, doesn't need to be tracked like that. Game mechanics soon. But for now, we don't have to worry too much about that. But it's gonna come soon, because this adds up fast. Like, am I just gonna add a little sprite and a texture 2D here? Every single time we add entity, an object, anything, it's a little, it's gonna add up fast. Either way. Window frame sprite. So the we're gonna go here. And we're gonna do the same thing here. We're gonna say this is content graphics. This is window frame sprite. And this is window 9 slice. Oh, we also need to implement a 9 slice system. Though not necessarily, I will see. But I think I should have a 9 slice, I think. Just so that we can create windows dynamically. But at the end of the day, windows should maybe be fully customized. In general. It's like a 9 slice can be very versatile, but it's gonna be the same window. over and over in that case. Kinda. And I don't know if you really want that. This here, window frame. Are these the same size? Are there any stats here? 64 times 64. This one is 254. Yeah, no. But it doesn't matter, I think. It was made to be a 9 slice, but we're not doing a 9 slice right now. But that doesn't matter. So I think it's actually 65 times 65. And then we go to the prefabs there. So I'm adding a button, but we don't really have a thing for that. But let's say window or entity dot add, let's say entity frame equals new entity. It comes with transform sprite renderer. So all we have to do is say frame.sprite-renderer.sprite equals globals.main.window-sprite. And then entity.add child entity frame. I'm gonna rename this to window entity. This is window component. And now here's the next issue. Render order. But I think that here it says sprite renderer.draw, but I think we should change that, perhaps. Or maybe not, I'm not sure. Because it is a little tricky here as well. So, man, this music is not. Let's not do that. The thing is, now that we are, you know, we have an ECS, so we have a bunch of entity systems. So in order for me to create a window that has a background, it has a frame, it has like 4 buttons. The frame needs to be an entity, each button needs to be an entity. Like, they don't need to, actually. You could cheat. They don't actually need to be that, but that's what we're doing. So then you need to have a render order, because here right now we are just like hard writing the character window to the just like that. And we could just say character window dot children 0 dot sprite renderer dot draw sprite batch. That didn't work. There, it doesn't quite work, but it almost works. Why is it off? Oh. It's because of this. Set position last here. Yeah, okay. So now it has a frame that follows with it, right? But now it has to have a rendering order. And how do you do that? There are a lot of options. You can just make it so that each individual entity just has its own rendering order, and then you sort them all in just one long list. We can do that. I think it kind of sucks, but it is doable. The alternative is to simply not put the child entities into the draw list, and then you make it so that as we draw the main entity, it has a recursive draw in it, so that it draws itself and then it draws everything else recursively in order inside of itself. But that also, I think, kind of has issues, because then you still have to manually sort them inside then, which is doable. But either way, I think you have to sort them manually inside, which isn't a problem, because I think generally speaking, that's just always going to be static. Like you create the window, and it's just going to be in the order it is always. Like in pretty much every case. I can't even think of a case where that would really change. But I just feel like it's a little bit against the spirit of the ECS, but then the alternative becomes like you need some kind of indexer. And then each object needs to have an index. I'm just thinking. Because I think the rendering should be split, like, or I don't think, I know it should be split into different phases, right? So movable windows should be drawn last. You should draw background. Well, it depends. If background is supposed to be able to overlap an object, then you need to draw background in a way that respects like objects in a way, but I don't think I will do that. I don't even know what kind of sprites I'll use. If it's just gonna be, you know, like Shadow Empire where you just have like icons kinda, or if there will actually be sprites on the map. I'm not sure. Or like a mix. But either way, I don't think that terrain would ever overlap an object, and in that case, you just draw terrain first. You draw each tile from back to front. That way you can have tile graphics that overlap a little bit. You can have little mountains or trees that stick out. Makes it feel like it has more depth. And then you draw objects again from back to front in Y. Then you draw in-game UI, like icons, health bars, that kind of stuff. Again, back to front. Then you draw static windows, static UI. Then you draw movable windows. And each of these should probably be just their own list. And then everything in there needs to be like a sorting algorithm for each. And also, yeah. Yeah, so you do that, you have a list of entities. And then the question becomes, when you sort an object, what you can do is either we have, like, the window is one entity in the list. And then we just go through and it renders, and then it does everything recursively inside itself. That way you only have one entity no matter how many buttons you have in the list. Or the window just checks all of its children and remove them from the list. And then it simply adds everything back in order. You just have it like add the children in reverse order to the list. That way we start rendering at the end of the list and go down. So that way, if you click a window, it will remove itself and all of its children from the render order list, add them back in reverse order by using add, and then it adds itself back in last. And then that way it's at the top if it gets clicked, for example. And objects could also do the same thing. I honestly don't really know. If it even matters which way I go. Both have like issues. And both of the issues don't matter. Because it's like having to add the list, like having to add all of the sub-objects to and from the list is annoying. But again, I don't think we will really have that many windows that will ever need to be rearranged. And in that case, it's never going to happen in any way. And if you have an object and you're using this recursive draw thing, then if you ever wanted an object to be like above or behind something else, you couldn't do that. I don't know why I would do that. I think we'll do the recursive version. I think that makes the most sense. for me. Oh. This is broken, by the way. Wait, what? Oh, yeah. It's the zoom. The windows aren't made for zooming yet. I haven't. That is not implemented. This is actually more the scale it should be. I would say this is the intended scale. Being able to zoom out a bit doesn't hurt, does it? Hmm. But I don't know. I think it's also kind of weird to render it recursively, but it is doable. The reason it's a little bit weird, in my opinion, is because we are kind of clashing with the spirit of the ECS. That's all. Let's see. Hold on, I'm reading. There's also the question of do I want everything to be like, should I have an entity that contains all other entities? Does that make anything easier? Or does that just make things kind of weird? I don't think it really matters. But here's the thing, I do think you need to have some sort of render order. Like, for the Windows, it's easy because you can just make it so that like the last active one is at the top, and then you just sort it by like active history kinda, and that just like naturally works. However, for objects, it's not as simple as that. And I did write something like this already for Legends of Terrestria, where basically the classic solution, right, is just to do Y sorting. That way you just give the entity a Y value or a render value based on its Y position. Right? That's easy. And it works usually. However, it doesn't really, because what happens if two objects are standing next to each other with the Y sorting, then they're all at the same Y. Then you get Z fighting. And it's just gonna like randomly render whichever, because or it's just gonna be like whichever entity like entered the coordinate last is rendered first, or vice versa. So the way I solved it was I basically made the render order value dynamic, in the sense that because what I don't like is if you use Y sorting, then it's just a value that goes up and down. And in Unity, the value is kind of low. Like, it's not like it's using an integer, I think. I'm not sure. I feel like it's using... It's not like a super high value you can go there. And it also... I don't think it has negatives either. Either way... I went around it by creating a system that sorts the objects by X and Y. So first you check the objects Y, and then you sort them that way, and then you resort them based on, like, if they're on the same Y, you sort them by their X. And then you assign them a render index just based on their position in the tree. Wait, does that even make sense? I don't know if that's what I'm doing. I feel like that's redundant. Because then you've already, like, they're already sorted, right? Like, then you just render. Um... Hmm. I don't really remember. What am I doing? Yeah, I'm setting the sorting order index of the object to be a uint64 that is basically the 1D index of the world in pixels. Is that retarded? Either way, we set it here, and that's it. What about this? Update sorting order. Here we have sort entities. It says get sorting layer. This returns the sorting layer. The sorting layer is set in the data module, and that's like, is it just regular, or is it a foreground, background, etc. I have a bunch of layers there. Then we have a sorting sublayer as well. And then we're setting sorting layer 1. And then we check the sorting layers. We're going through. This is a while loop. We're sorting the entity list by sorting layer 1. And then we check if the sorting layer is the same. Then we get sorting index y. Let's see. If y1 equals, if get type is LOT object in the entity list, then we are sorting it by the modified position y. This is just y sorting here then. And if it's a particle, we get a sorting index of y. And if y1 is less than y2, then we switch position, and then we continue the while loop. If they are on the same y, we then get a sorting sublayer. And if the sorting sublayer is less than the other one, then we use that to sort. And if the sorting sublayer is the same, then we get the X position. And then we sort by that. And that's the end of it. God damn. So it's sorting by layer, sublayer, Y, and X in order to sort the objects by position. But it's actually kind of a cheap operation, I would say. Because generally speaking, it's just going to change like one object. But of course it's a list, so inserting it is not just a simple operation. Insert kind of sucks, but I don't think there's a better way of doing it in regards to how to index it. I think you just have to do that. So, what did we learn? Oh boy. Basically, what we'll do is we'll say public list entity game object render list. And the next one is going to be called game GUI render list. The next one is going to be called static interface static GUI render list, maybe. And then dynamic GUI render list. And then we need a public void Maybe not. In draw, we just put these. And then you say for game object render list I dot draw. Sprite render dot draw. Sprite batch. And then it's game object. No, it's grid matrix dot draw first. Then game object render list. And that's gonna be I equals render list dot count minus 1. While I is greater than or equal to 0, I minus minus. And then we just render that. And then we duplicate this. We just change which one it is. Game UI, static GUI, dynamic GUI. Then they just need to be populated. And sorted. So what do we try there? Let's see. Here we have character windows, sprite renderer, draw, children, sprite renderer, draw. See, the thing here then is that instead of having draw in the sprite renderer, we need to have draw in the entity. Which I suppose is acceptable. I don't really know why the draw would need to take a like game time. I guess if you want to use draw to like iterate frames and stuff, but I think that should be handled before the draw step, not in it. And then you can save that, and then you say for you say sprite renderer dot draw sprite batch, and then we iterate through. I double tapped it. Fuck you. Then we iterate through children. And here it doesn't really matter if it's back to front or front to back, because the only thing that determines if it's correct or not is the order in which we add the children to the object in the prefab creation, right? That's the only thing that matters here. And most objects aren't multi entity objects. It's really mainly UI. So it doesn't matter. So here we can just say children I.draw sprite batch, and sprite batch. And then here we have recursive draw, right? And that's it. Then we remove sprite renderer here. Like that. And then here in prefabs, it returns the entity, but it should be globals dot main dot, this is dynamic GUI dot insert, no, dot add window entity. This could take... This is just a test window. So let's do this. Int layer. And then we'll say if layer equals 0, then this is game object. Here it's game GUI, static GUI, dynamic GUI. One, two, three. And then here, we won't do this anymore. And then here, we're gonna do character window equals that. Now, here we don't necessarily need to reference anything. So we can just say databases 1, 2, 3. That works. Now, the click detection doesn't work properly here. But that is actually understandable. But the render order does work here. This is the top window. This is the third window. This is the second window. And this is the fourth window. Yeah. This one is below all of them. Where's the click handled? It is going through the Entity Master Dictionary. No, it's the clickable entity list. Yeah, that doesn't make sense. Clickable entity list, there. It's not entirely wrong, actually, but we have to change this to dynamic GUI. I don't know what to call it, other than clickable. Clickable dynamic GUI list. And then we need to have clickable static GUI list. We need to have clickable game GUI list. And then here we have clickable game object list. I suppose we might want that. But then we have to do annoying things here, right? Because here we're doing clickable dynamic GUI list count. Can remove these right lines so it's not as weird and annoying here. But basically, you see here we're doing clickable dynamic GUI list. Which I think should be in reverse. Again. So this should be I is dot count -1. This should be I is greater than or equal to 0, and this is I minus minus. And this is actually this is actually correct, right? So we then need to do this, where we check the clickable static GUI list. And then this is repeat. This is gonna repeat 4 times. And this is clickable game GUI. And this is clickable game object list. Like my biggest problem with programming all of this is that I'm always in the headspace of generalized engine. Because I'm always thinking like, okay, I can't do this because what if it's for a game that doesn't work this way? But I'm like, but it is for a game that works this way. Like, what are you talking about? I do think there's some value in that though, like, because if your code is like a little bit more generalized, then it's easier to reuse your own code, right? I think there is still value in that. But yeah, because now here we go through all clickable objects before we return it. Hold on. I want that to be after handle mouse input. There. So now that all happens in check left click. And if that is true, then we return here and we cannot click a hex. If all of those things there return false, then we can go and click a hex. And this is kind of shitty because it means that if you have like 1,000 objects, you have to iterate through all of them. But this is one of those cases that it's fine right now, but if the amount of objects start to increase, we then have to implement an area system, which is super. It's honestly like super easy. Yeah, it's extremely easy. It's so easy we should probably do that early, just so it's done immediately. Because it's literally just you check the object's position, you check its size, then you just add it to every single list that every single area that it touches. And because we're only working in 2D now instead of having like a 3D world, you know, it's just some lists. Just put it in there. It's easy. And they can even be dictionaries because they're using keys. So you just... Actually, they should be hash sets. You just add the object's master ID to each hash set that it touches, and then you just remove it. That's it. That way, when you click, you can just go and fetch the hash set in that area, and then every single time that you still have to do the whole thing, unfortunately. Like you still have to do all of this shit. You have to. But what you can do is you can simply say if the current because here we're iterating through the clickable game object list here, right? Instead of having to access the entity master dictionary and outing a component from there and then checking for a collision and all of this, you just check, is a clickable game object I contained in hash set? If no, then continue. So it doesn't solve the entire issue entirely, but it massively eases it up, I think. And you can't do it, like you can't just use the hash set. Actually, you kind of can, but you would have to not use a hash set. And I think that's a bad idea. Because what you could do is you could You could use a list and you could sort every area by render index or like whatever. And that way you could just do this, but I think that's just having the area is enough optimization that it doesn't matter. So I don't think it's a big deal, and it's not really something worth thinking about right now. So let's see. If we run it now, we drag this one, we drag that one, we drag that one, drag this one. Yeah, now it works properly. And then you click there, and then that becomes a hex selection. Now next up, reordering windows. So currently we are using a test window only, right? Here we have a behavior database. The window behavior here doesn't really do anything. Let's do something like this. We go into entity, and in the entity we have a public list of entities which is a render list reference. So this should only be a reference. And so what we do then is in the prefab, we expand on this a little bit. And we say window entity dot render list reference equals this. Right? And I feel like this is mainly for testing purposes, but what we can then do is we can say in the window, we can say trigger for the window It's not this. This trigger is. This is not used. We're using the window behavior. And in there, here we're saying that this is dragged, right? And what I want to say here is, if this triggers at all, let's say base entity dot render list reference dot remove base entity, and then we say add base entity. Then we go back here to main controller. Then here we create a few more test windows on 3, and we can get rid of these. That bugged out immediately. It is kind of working, but it's working in reverse. Yes, it's here, I think. This should be from 0 to max in draw. Draw should render from 0 to count. That's the entire reason why we are inserting things backwards. I think. Oh. All of these need to be plus plus. Oh. It works, but the click detection is messed up. I don't think the click detection is resorting it. But it does work, right? Like you see, when I click this, it brings it over. The rendering is correct now. It's just the actual click detection is bugged. And why is it bugged? We're going through clickable dynamic GUI list.count. And so in window I feel like this should work. Why doesn't it? Where's my console? Like output. That's the one. Bro, why does it say sprite is null all the time? What is that? Sprite is null. Sprite renderer. What do you mean sprite is null? If sprite is null, return. But what? Oh, it's not. Oh, it's the button. It's the button. Let's go here and delete the button. That's it. It's annoying because it kept spamming the shit out of it. Huh? I didn't even change anything. What? What did I change? I added this. Was it this? No. Is it gets added? Oh yeah, it was that. Let's do another hack here. Yeah. So here it's clickable game object. And here it's clickable game GUI. Clickable static GUI. Clickable dynamic GUI. Now it's clickable again. Ah, no, it's still weird. Why is it not? Because I haven't implemented it at all. So the window needs a public clickable entity list reference. It's a list of ints. No, that was just half of the code. Then we go to window behavior. And then we go to base window dot clickable entity list reference. Wait, this is fucked. Here we need a for loop. This is kind of shit. If item 1 equals base entity dot entity ID, then we have to say int then we say dot remove no, base window dot clickable entity list reference dot remove at I, and then we're gonna say dot add b. I think, because the way this works right now is that the clickable entity list is just a tuple of integers that reference the ID of the entities, and it references the component type ID for that entity that allows to be clicked. Like if it's a window or a button or whatever. And the issue is that that doesn't allow quick reference via a key, right? But I don't know if any of the options that take a key can be sorted. Maybe a sorted list. Sorted list. Yeah, maybe. Ish. Are accessible by key and by index. But either way, this works, I think. Yeah, this works now. So now we have windows that can overlap and can be moved around, and we can now click, bring them to the forefront. And this is, I think this means basically that the UI system is like almost done. Oh, almost. Very huge almost. Because now there are other issues like, okay, now we need to add text and shit. And I don't know exactly what we'll do. I think we'll just do like draw a string or something for text for now, for like any text in the game. Because otherwise it involves creating a text rendering system. That means having a text sprite sheet and then creating a way of rendering that on the screen, and I think that's just too much work right now. So if we can just create a little string system that just takes the string and does draw string in the correct order, I think that's good enough for now. But it will still need to be an entity. But it will be an entity that doesn't use a sprite renderer really right now. It'll still have one. But we'll need to figure that out. And that's kind of instantly like an issue with, okay, so I have the entity here and all entities have a sprite renderer now. But I don't know if I think that's the right way to go about it. Because it's like, does everything necessarily use the sprite renderer? Maybe. Maybe if we like diversify the sprite renderer so it can do certain things. Because right now it literally just draws the thing, right? But the sprite renderer could be expanded to be more elaborate. So that the sprite renderer handles like 9 slices, it handles printing text, it handles printing everything really, and not just be a simple draw call. I think that makes more sense than anything. And then maybe it shouldn't be called a sprite renderer, maybe we should just call it a renderer. Or entity renderer. That way it doesn't feel bad to make it do other things other than rendering sprites. It's not an entity renderer. I don't really want to call it just a renderer because I think that's too misleading. But I think we'll stop there. It's almost midnight. We've been doing this for 3.5 hours, and I actually did what I wanted to do today, so we have windows we can click and drag, reorder, the click detection works, so I think that's really all we can ask for. For today. So what do we do next time? I think we render text, but we need to create buttons. Buttons and text rendering. So that we can create menus. And once we have menus, we can actually like almost start trying to do some gameplay elements. Like we can start trying to make like Fox events. Like this, like something triggers, and then you have like some options, and then it makes it go away, or it progresses into another thing, or that's something we could start doing. But we also, in reality, need to implement something with the tiles too. But I think getting this to work first before we start messing around with tiles or with the hexagons more is probably the right choice, because the hexagons are gonna be kind of involved. The hexagons are each going to need to contain a bunch of data, which we will see exactly what that will entail. Because I do want each tile to be like a significant region and have like resources, supplies, all this kind of stuff. It needs to have like traversal penalties. It needs to have exits, etc., etc. And then on top of that, it needs to have more. But that's actually already implemented. But you need to be able to have stuff inside of a certain tile without it being like in every tile, you know, like. But that's already solved here somewhere. Like content, I think. Oh, it's in the matrix. Grid matrix. Here, a content dictionary, right? It's a dictionary that takes an int and contains a list of ints. And I actually don't know what the idea with the list is, but the int is just gonna be, you know, that's your tile index. So each tile will have an index. That way you can just access this here. So if you want to check a tile, you just go in here and you see what it contains. And I don't know what the tuple idea was. But it basically needs to point towards like an index of something, I would say. It could be like type and something. I don't know. I don't know what the tuple idea was. Either way, this is just a way to contain like units and stuff as well. That way you can if this key exists, you can add stuff to the list in it as just IDs. And then you can be like, okay, if I click on tile number 5, we just check the index. Oh, it's containing entity number this or that. This could be like type, or it could contain an event. It could contain, you know, whatever. Whatever is beyond the scope of a hexagon's content. And each hexagon should just contain, you know, basic environmental stuff. Like the stuff I just listed off. And then the reason I don't really want to start messing around with the grid right now is because the first thing we need to do is do hexagonal pathfinding. And kill me. Like, it's not that hard to do A star really, but it's still shit. In fact, it will probably be easy because I've already done it, so I already have a reference, and the way I did it before was like 1,000 times harder because I had to do A star that took into account dynamic sizes of objects, so that it was like, okay, you're doing like tile-based A star, but each object takes up 2 times 2 times 5 tiles. So you have to check all of those tiles for every expansion. So it'll be a lot easier to just check, you know, one. So that I don't think it'll be that big of a deal. But yeah, we'll stop there. And we'll continue someday when my brain is not mush. But yeah. Until next time, thanks for hanging. Have a good night. Bye-bye.